Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update for the 11th of September 2023, 9/11. Please go and check out my first news update from earlier today. As I say, 9/11. It's worth remembering, and you know, this is not in any way to minimize 9/11 at all. No, not at all. But just remember the reaction that certain people in, let's talk about American politics, had to 9/11 and the utter fury that caused, rightfully, and that you can argue it got misdirected against all Muslims, for example, and you know the whole Middle East was like enemy number one type thing. But remember that kind of rage and the sense of indignation that something so terrible as that could happen. Now multiply that death toll by an order of magnitude, right? And instead of being 2 buildings that were destroyed, you've got entire towns and cities affected right across the country. And then wonder why that kind of indignation isn't transferred to support of Ukraine by some politicians. Not many politicians do, but many people who would have been absolutely enraged and were absolutely enraged, and rightfully so, by what happened in 9/11 with the Twin Towers. Why do you not have that sense of indignation with Ukraine? Yeah, I know it's a different country, it's a foreign country, but that sense of other people from outside the country destroying parts of that country in an invasion. Would you have wanted to do peace with ISIS or with Al Qaeda? No. And how come? You know, I think it's worth unpicking that maybe a little bit. But yeah, today's a sad day. It's a day of memory, memorialization of that tragic event. So anyway, let's move on to Ukraine to talk about what's going on the front line. This is yesterday's map, so apologies that it's got all the pins from yesterday. I'll be updating it, and JR, thank you so much to JR. Without him, I'd be screwed. Helping with this mapping. We'll have a look at it before my Frontline update to get the latest changes, but we've got a bunch of sources to go through. I just wanted to talk about this. I said I'll talk about this in my Frontline video proper later, and I mentioned it in the last one. I am slightly buoyed by what I think is a slow and methodical approach to Ukraine gaining advantage across all the theatres of war. And I think that their attrition to the Russian forces is so fundamental that it is massively important, but it's not something that people are reporting in the mainstream media on a daily basis. So although we might not see huge successes on the front line, right across the front line, it's not to say there aren't successes using other metrics, something I talk often about. Right, but part of the front line is indeed the sea. Ukraine has regained control of the Boyko towns in the Black Sea. These are 2 drilling rigs for gas production. They were captured by the Russians in 2015 and have been used for military purposes. So these sit somewhere somewhere between Snake Island over here and the Cape of Tarkankut. So I think there are several areas of platforms. These are a pair of platforms that have been retaken. Boyko Towers. Is there a pair? 2 drilling rigs, yes. So in fact, Null Reports has a 13.5-minute video, although it's not with English subtitles. So be warned, all the Ukrainian talking in it will be not understood generally by most of us. But it's a fascinating insight into what has happened in the operations to take both Snake Island and those towers. Anyway, moving on, a short one from Kenneth Gregg. The Russians have attempted counterattacks north of Verbove, so we'll go and look at this soon, down on the Zaporizhia front line by Robotina, in an attempt to stop our flank attacks on Verbove itself. They have deployed their so-called elite and have temporarily stopped us. We will again see a few days of exploitation tactics from our people before we break through their line of attack. As I said before, Verbove is vital to the Russians. They have also brought troops from the Staromayorsky front to Verbove, which opened up for our troops on this section of the front. Our troops took the offered chance and advanced in the direction of Novodonetsky. Actually, I think more Novomayorsky. The military leader of the Ukrainian Security Service, Mr. Budinov, agrees with me that the war will not last long. He adds that this opinion is based on the analyses and facts available about the Russian resources. He goes on to say that if you think 6 to 7 months is a long time, he agrees it will be a long war. I want to remind you of what happened at Irpin. The Russians had all the people they needed, but no equipment. They used the last of it all and then retreated to Belarus. So this is quite a positive spin. I wouldn't say spin, positive analysis on what Kenneth Gregg, the Finnish fighter in Ukraine, thinks at the moment. And while there might be some success for the Ukraine for the Russians in counterattacking north of Verbove, or possibly even south of Verbove, although there are successes of the Ukrainians here, the Russians will be counterattacking all the time. As we know, that's what they do. But as I keep saying, it exhausts their own resources and leaves them more vulnerable in the long term. And there's this idea that not only are they pulling in reserves from the 76th GAAD, so the elite paratroopers of VDV from the Crimea area, Bakhmut area as well, and bring them down to the Robotyne area, but there is a claim that they are bringing troops down from another hot part of the front line to Robotyne, which, if that is true, then it goes to what I've been saying, which is that this is where it's all at. This is the do or die area of the front line, and moving them from one difficult area to an even more difficult area means that the Russians don't have strength in depth. But is that true? That's the question. Right, looking at what Syriac Maps, a pro-Russian mapper, has to say about areas of the front line. Ukrainians have gained territory in Sperna. They have gained territory in, if we go back up here to this one, so Zerebianki as well. That's the first time we've seen that for a long time. I'm going to show you all these on a map. I'm just showing you their maps first. Then we go to Robotyne. Ukrainians have gained territory northeast of Novoprokopivka. However, Syriac Maps also claims that the Russians have gained territory north of Verbove there, which is a real problem possibly for the Ukrainians, though not around the trench lines just east of west of Verbove. So that's pretty important. So up and down the front line there are some movements. Let's put that on my map. Okay, so Sperny, some gains for the Ukrainians along the Seversk front line, and Sperna is just around here. Yep, there it is. So some Ukrainian gains there. I'll put that on my map later. And then there are claims about Andriivka. We'll come to that soon. And then some claims about Opitny in Avdiivka. And then it's about mainly Robotyne. So some gains for the Ukrainians in this northeastern area of Novoprokopivka, but the Russians gaining in a counterattack to the north of Verbove. But also Ukrainians gaining around the north of Zerebianki, which I think is important. Okay, let's look at some of these other sources. So that's Syriac Maps telling us that. Wargonzo saying, this is a pro-Russian source saying that Ukrainians have entered Andriivka. I was saying yesterday that it's some claims that it's been liberated, other claims that it's a grey zone, but the very least is that the Russians aren't there anymore, I would argue. And this is as a result of the Ukrainians investing time and efforts in cutting off the supply route to this small village, and that seems to be paying off. So let's go and look at Andriivka. If we come out of the southern front line and move across to Bakhmut area, to the south of Bakhmut here, and we're going to go in and look at this small village of Andriivka. So cutting off supply lines as they did with Klishchivka just to the north here. I don't think there's any Russian presence in Klishchivka anymore. They cut off the ground line of communication just to the north, which meant that the Russians were unable to supply their troops and then were hit by artillery and had to sort of get out whichever way they could. And I think that's basically the same for Andriivka, where the Russians have pulled out, and it may be liberated or it may just be a grey zone. The control of the town or of the small village may not yet be secure. Ukrainian forces advance around Pryutny, so now we're going to go down to the south. I don't have too much information on the rest of Bakhmut at the moment, but I almost certainly will when I come around to doing my full Frontline update. Same for Avdiivka and Opitny. There are claims about Opitny. I don't think... Oh, have I got that in the wrong place? Yeah, let's go to Opitny first. So I did have that in the wrong place, sorry. The northern part of Opitny is under Ukrainian control, and that is the official claim from Hanna Maliar, the Deputy Defense Minister. Some claims yesterday that the entire village was liberated may be true. We've also got Ukrainian troops liberated part of Andriivka as well, as we've just talked about. Now, no panic here. Everything is going according to plan. So nationalists of the armed forces of Ukraine were able to capture the settlement of Opitny. So here we have a Russian source saying the whole of Opitny was captured, which is not far from Donetsk airport. Now fighting is taking place on the outskirts of the airport. The situation is difficult, said Ian Gagin, the advisor to the acting DPR, so the Donetsk People's Republic leader, I presume. So this is really significant. So some are saying that just the northern part of Opitny is under the control of the Ukrainians, as you can see here from yesterday. Then some of the lines were sort of going along this road. I've also heard, and I reported yesterday, that the claims that Opitny is liberated. Well, that's a Russian claim saying that actually that is now under control of the Ukrainians and fighting is on the northern outskirts of the airport. If that is true, that is massively significant. This was such an important point of the 2014 iteration of this war, as fighting famously in the airport with the 93rd. So you can go and check that out in the history books, or on YouTube you can look at the 3-part documentary with English subtitles about the 93rd, who also had that massacre in Ilovaisk where they were hit by the Russians. But anyway, really interesting stuff. But yeah, the airport is super important. During chaotic retreating from Opitny, Russian artillery conducted fire red on red, so friendly fire, killing 27 Russians and 34 injured. So again, another example. I don't know whether that's to do with electronic warfare, comms being down or whatever, but we are hearing quite a bit of, red on red here, blue on blue, friendly fire. So yeah, there are different claims about what's going on in Opitny, but that is the claim that, yeah, it is arguably under control of the Ukrainians. And that is a huge move. I mean, it could be, as I said yesterday, and someone else was saying this, could be a pincer movement going from Pervomaisky through Pisky and up, and down from Opitny to cut off Vodyane. I don't know if that's realistic at all, but it could be what they are trying to achieve. And then, so I got these all in the wrong order, so apologies for that. But Andriivka, south of Bakhmut, Ukrainian forces have entered. Logical step after clearing almost completely Klishivka. Anyway, now to get back onto where I should be, which is Pryutny. And we come down now to the next point on the front line, which is Donetsk, southern Donetsk, on the way to Zaporizhia. Right on the border of Zaporizhia here, we got Pryutny, and the Russians having some success in counter-attacking around there. Well, this claim is that the Ukrainian armed forces advance around Pryutny, confirmed by Deep State map. The Ukrainians are creating multiple pressure points for the Russian troops in the Zaporizhia direction, and this is because they're also fighting hard just over by Novodonetsk and Novomayorsk, where we have had gains for the Ukrainians over the last couple of days. We'll see what turns up there after further researching. Right, we're going to move to Robotyne now. Ukraine has continued to gradually advance between Novoprokopivka and Verbove. Ukraine has also taken new positions north of Novoprokopivka. So this is War Mapper telling us that in this northeastern area, the Ukrainians are gaining. This is where the tanks were seen yesterday. A lot of mappers have now done exactly what I said should be the case, which is moving the Russian lines further to the south there. This area north of Verbove is where possibly the Russians have counterattacked and had some success, although war map here seems to indicate that the Ukrainians are pushing in every part of the Robotyne area. Novoprokopivka, geolocated footage shows the presence of Ukrainian tanks east of Novoprokopivka. This is exactly what I was saying yesterday in several of my videos. Tanks operating at such close distance suggests that the Ukrainians have cleared most, if not all, of the Russian positions east and northeast of and Russian forces now only have the solid control over their positions on the outskirts of the town. Exactly what I was saying, and I would put the Russian defensive line somewhere like that myself, if I were doing the map myself. Yesterday, Russian drones showed presence of Ukrainian infantry on the eastern part of the main trench line north of Novoprokopivka, confirming the news about Ukrainian advance in this direction. So that could be those trench lines there, which was we already knew. I'd reported on that, and in fact, unless there's been a counterattack, I would say all of those trench lines are probably under Ukrainian control. Anyway, moving on. Here we have, as a result of the kind of those tank battles that have taken place there, Ukraine's advance mentioned earlier near Robotyne and Novoprokopivka has been expanded due to the geolocation of Ukrainian tanks. So that's like saying, right, okay, everywhere behind that is pretty much solidly controlled by the Ukrainians then. Now here is Sarin saying that the Russian counter-assault on the eastern part of Robotyne pocket and the Ukrainian small gains in the south, that's the case. So this is to say that there's some fairly sizable gains there for the Ukrainians, for the Russians, sorry, and while the Ukrainians are making smaller gains near Novoprokopivka. I don't know how true this is, but it has been reported by a number of different sources. And then Andrew Perpetua just saying the two gains for the Russians he had on his map and the last change were not assaults, they were just rejigging. So anyway, I will update my map later to reflect that actually there's a few bits and pieces. I think it's interesting that Ukrainians have made some gains near Zarebianki. I think that's important. I think Opitny is a huge potential opportunity for the Ukrainians there, but I also think the same for the south of Bakhmut, and it's going to be really interesting to see how things pan out in Robotyne, because as I've said before, it's where it's all at. It's the kind of do or die area of the front line. Both sides have their best forces operating there, and it's the biggest, deepest, densest area of Russian defenses. Right, military aid. Let's get back to talking about F-16s, because why not? Ukraine expects to fly F-16s in combat this winter, according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, when I first read that, because you think of splitting up a year from January to December, and you think, right, let's split that into four, spring, summer, autumn, winter. And you think, so winter's going to be December. But of course, winter is like next February, and March is the start of spring, and so March goes on to May. So originally, the claim was that they'll have the F-16s flying by spring, the end of spring, but that goes all the way to May next year. Just, all I'm trying to do is say that, hey, it might not be December, it's probably going to be the end of February that they're talking about here. So based on initial assessments, Ukrainian officials now believe that with American training expected to begin this month or next, a handful of Ukrainian fighter pilots could be ready to go as early as February. Ukrainian and US officials said the US could train experienced English proficient Ukrainian pilots in as little as 5 months, a group of likely fewer than 10 pilots for now, according to Ukrainian assessments. And of course, they're going to train the rest on English in another place. So US officials have said Ukrainians wouldn't be ready to fly F-16s in combat until at least mid-2024 and possibly much later. So that was what US officials had said. Ukrainians are hoping for it to be a good number of months earlier than that. Dozens of Ukrainian fighters are set to begin English language training at the Defense Language Institute English Language Center at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio within weeks. Pilots who already speak English will go directly to flight training at Morris Air National Guard Base in Tucson, Arizona, home of the 162nd Wing, a US defense official said. I think it's Lynn, surprise, it's us, as a viewer on my channel, lives near that base. I think it's you that said that you sometimes see them flying F-16s. Anyway, an F-16 requires roughly 16 hours of maintenance for every hour in the air. And US officials have warned that finding and training maintenance crews who will also need to speak English could be more challenging than preparing the pilots. In other words, it's not just about preparing the pilots. It's about preparing the ground crew. and the training for them might be even more, I don't mean important, but an important factor in this than the pilots. So they've got the pilots. There's long been said that the Ukrainians have more pilots than airframes. They've got no shortage of decent enough fighter pilots. What they might have a shortage of in this context are people that are ready to be trained to do maintenance on the F-16s. Because if you've got a set of pilots and you have more pilots than airframes in Ukraine at the moment, taking a bunch of those pilots away might not massively degrade your air force capability. So you can still operate those planes because you've got a surplus of pilots. But you might have a surplus of trained air force or airframe mechanics, air-based mechanics, right? So if you're going to take a bunch of them out to retrain them on the F-16, then actually that could end up degrading your own air force capabilities. But I think it's these mechanics that could be the difference between sooner rather than later. A smaller American squadron consists of roughly a dozen jets, 60 pilots, and more than 100 people working to maintain the aircraft. And that's really important to remember. Anyway, moving on. ATACMS, Biden edges nearer to resolution on supplying Ukraine with long-range missiles. Quote, a choice may very well be coming quickly, said one senior Biden administration official. And then there is movement in negotiations with the United States on the possible supply of ATACMS, long-range guided missiles, to Kyiv, said Zelensky. And that was Zelensky last night. And that's really significant. So ATACMS look to be on the cards, not just rumor. Right, Rheinmetall will provide another 40 Marder infantry fighting vehicles. So these are the German infantry fighting vehicles that are really pretty decent. And Rheinmetall are going to provide another 40 of them. That's excellent. Germany are just coming up with the goods. It's brilliant. Well done. Ultra Gonzavod will resume building T-80 tanks from scratch, says the CEO Alexander Potapov. Alexander Potapov said, this task is worthwhile. At least the military has set it before us. We are now working with the Ministry of Industry because it requires capacities. I don't know how easy that is going to be. Putting a tank into production is a scale of actions that is hard to imagine in Russia. It means dozens of workshops, thousands of new machines, tens of thousands of builders, and thousands of skilled workers, given that they're also being sanctioned at the moment. And the T-80 is a big fuel, it's a juicy machine. It's interesting they've chosen that one, but nonetheless, yeah. T-80 perhaps going to be built from scratch, but I don't know how easy that will be for the Russians to do. Okay, Ukraine and Sweden have agreed on the joint production of CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles, with the nearest target being 1,000 Swedish BMPs for the Ukrainian army. Wow. This was reported by Deputy Minister of Defense for Ukraine, Hanna Malia. Quote, the Swedish vehicle has effective anti-tank capabilities and a powerful 40mm automatic cannon. There's quite a few variations of the CV-90 with different caliber of guns as well. But anyway, the 40mm autocannon version can fire at a distance of up to 3 kilometers, and the maximum range of shot is more than 12 kilometers, writes Malia. So, yeah, I don't know what that means. Can fire at a distance of up to 3 kilometers with a maximum range of 12 kilometers. Quite makes sense to me. Ukrainian Marines from the 1st Marine Battalion conduct amphibious training on Finnish-supplied Sisu XA-180 APCs. So this is Finland are another nation that don't really shout about what they're giving to Ukraine. When they say the amount, they say we're giving like $170 million worth of equipment, but they don't break down what that is. And then you find out that they've got a bunch of Swedish stuff here and there. So here we've got some Swedish amphibious APCs being used in training. And that's also hopeful because you think, well, the Ukrainians really could use amphibious vehicles in a number of places. Zaporizhia Reservoir, anyone? Yeah, and then going back to Russia. Sorry, I should have had that other Russian one at the end. I'm not doing very well at organising my stuff today. Apologies. Here we have Sarin saying, and this has done the rounds. As you can imagine, this is inspired the mirth of many anti-Russians here. So Russia is not running out of tanks. But this is a T-55 and T-60, T-64. They are the new main battle tanks in the current war. There are reports that Russia is trying to reactivate the production of a line of T-80s. series that Sarin says is doubtful, but I don't know, they're claiming that. But then when you see these videos, like I don't understand what the point of releasing these videos are. So the Russians, it appears here, have released this video of Russian tankers, getting all geared up and looking at, at, I suppose, extolling the virtues of these T-55s, T-62s and whatnot tanks. It's going inside them, looking at all the kit, which is all pretty old-fashioned. If I was in charge of PR for Russia, I wouldn't be producing videos like this, because it just shows that they're pretty desperate. Here are five tanks. 5 tanks that are like 60 years old plus. Why are you doing this? This is just like, all this does is show that you guys are in deep trouble because you're bringing out these proper old tanks. Yeah, they can hurt someone. Yeah, a bit of lead landing on your head from one of these bad boys is gonna, but they aren't really that bad boys compared to some of the other stuff you could be throwing on the front line, like a bunch more T-90Ms, for example. But no, you're doing videos about T-55s and T-62s. Like, you're not in a good place, really, are you? Anyway, probably why I haven't got a job in PR with the Russian MOD. Okay. Russians want to exchange, so moving on to geopolitical stuff now. Russians want to exchange an American journalist for a killer. Moscow has raised the issue of exchanging Russian hitman Vadim Krasikov for American citizens, businessman Paul Whelan and journalist Ivan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reported. FSB Colonel Krasikov is serving a life sentence in Germany for the murder of Chechen commander Zelimkhan Kangoshvili. Americans Paul Whelan and Ivan Gershkovich are accused by the Kremlin of espionage. I would have thought that's a pretty good swap, to be honest. I don't know that this person being in prison is particularly valuable as he's not going to have military that much knowledge, kind of FSB knowledge. I don't know, having been in prison, so everyone knows who he is. Might as well let him go and get a journalist and Paul Whelan back. I'd say that would be a good haul for the Americans, but we'll see how that turns out. As I said before, when I talked about previous hostage exchanges, you can only exchange what the other side is willing to exchange. You can't force something on them. This is what the previous discussions about Greiner, the basketball player. It's like, you should have done this. You should have swapped Paul Whelan for the Russian prisoner. It's like, you can't force that on the Russians. The Russians will only swap who they think is worth them swapping. So you have to come to a mutual agreement. You can't force the other side to do this. If they don't want to swap that person, they won't swap that person. And so you've got to understand how these kind of exchanges take place and what the psychology is behind it. Anyway, breaking, Romania found the wreckage of another Russian drone. I think this is now the 3rd Russian drone that's been found on Ukrainian territory near Reni and Ismail, the ports on the Danube River. Whether Romania will do anything about this, I don't know. But, that's quite a few of them now. Military exercises involving US and Romanian troops have started. Look, I've got something in the right place. Have started in Moldova. This was reported by the Ministry of Defense of Moldova. Quote, the exercises, which will last until September the 22nd, include infantry and artillery firing and are aimed at developing capabilities and increasing interoperability between the participating armies. I think this is at the same time as NATO are just about to do their biggest ever military exercises. Is that correct? So, yeah, when you look back at what Putin's intentions were for this war, NATO both expanding, getting closer to Russian borders and doing more than it's ever done with more, better funded militaries than they've had for a long time is probably not one of the outcomes Putin was looking for. Mossad director David Barnett, so Mossad is the Israeli intelligence outfit. Director David Barnett says that Iran had intentions to provide Russia with short and long-range missiles in addition to the drones that it sold. This was foiled, he says. Quote, they have intentions to sell other weapons that will also be foiled. Our fear is that the Russians will transfer advanced weapons to the Iranians in return, which will certainly endanger our peace and maybe even our existence here. Right. There's been this fascinating interplay between Israel, Iran, and Ukraine. And Israel hit those Ukrainian Shahid bases last year. Was it last year? And there was all, it sent the internet all a flutter. But in reality, they weren't trying to help Ukraine. They were helping themselves. And here is another example where actually Israel are working in their own self-interest. Now, you can say this the same for everyone, actually. You can say this the same for the Baltic nations, for Poland. They're helping Ukraine isn't so much about the pure moral calculus, but about actually what's in their best interest as being very close to Russia and the next in line for Russia imperialism. So this isn't unusual. People, as I've argued many times before, assistance to Ukraine isn't about... So America aren't piling in resources to Ukraine just because it's morally good to do so. They're doing it because it's in their strategic interest to do so. And this is why people like Vivek Ramaswamy and even Trump, I would argue, and other politicians in the US who argue for appeasement and argue to stop sending aid just don't have a grip on foreign policy, US foreign policy. They don't understand their own political landscape. And they don't understand that the US is doing everything they're doing because it's in the US's interest to do so. They're not doing it because, oh, look, we got a shed load of money left over that we didn't spend on housing and hospitals. So we're going to just send that to Ukraine because, hey, we feel sorry for them. Oh, I feel sorry for you, Ukraine. Here's a bunch of money. No, it's like, damn, Russia's doing this. China's involved over there. We need to send a message to China. We also need Russia to be degraded. We don't want them to have some kind of hegemony with BRICS and with China. We need our position in the world to have maximum influence. So we are going to help Ukraine because it's really important. There's economic stability in Europe. That there's there's peace in Europe. That kind of stability, as well as, we need Russia not to be gaining, etc., etc., all those things. It's like, so we are going to do that. So when we then look at what Israel are doing, we can understand that they're going to be doing things in their own self-interest, right? How they help Ukraine will be seen through the lens of, well, what's in our best interests to do with regard to Ukraine. How do we as Israel come out better by helping Ukraine? And so therefore it's going to be more in terms of Iran to Ukraine than Russia to Ukraine. How I think Israel will be acting. And here we have, we foiled some things here, but the reality is foiling Iranian stuff and therefore, impinging on Iran being able to help Ukraine is about Israel benefiting. But that's not criticism, that's how it is. Although it could be a criticism. The Hungarian government intends in the future to transfer the operation of the Pax nuclear power plant from Russian to French nuclear fuel in order to reduce its energy dependence on Russia. This was stated by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Wow! Stab in the back, says Nexter. I need to look into that because that is really, really significant. And that is moving away from the Russian sphere of influence and into the European sphere of influence. This is massive. Right, Armenian government has sent the Rome Statute to Parliament for ratification. So Armenia, previously, very much in the sphere of influence of Russia, is now, doing military exercises with the US, receiving US politicians, and joining the International Criminal Court through the Rome Statute, which means Putin can step foot there without being arrested, that kind of thing. This is huge. Again, you've got a movement at some of these Caucasus states and Eurasian states away from Russia and into the spheres of influence of the US, or perhaps moving away from Russia towards China, which is itself an interesting dynamic. Anyway, moving on, head of the German Foreign Ministry, Annalena Baerbock, who is actually part of the Green Party in coalition with the SDP. She's coming out really well from this war, as in she has been very strong on it, and I think has garnered a lot of respect for her positioning. So she's in Kyiv on an unannounced visit. That's her fourth visit to Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale war. Good on her and good on Germany. I think Germany are in the zone at the moment. Brazilian now, another bit of kind of maybe realpolitik here, a bit of... So in politics, my opinion is that if you've got a really tough decision to make that you're not sure could go either way, could be really good, but it could be really bad, and you're not sure how it's going to be interpreted, defer that decision to someone else. All right? That's a key to politics, or to being a politician. And then if the decision goes well, you can say, well, I gave it to them so that this decision could end up like that. Or if it goes badly, you say, hey, it wasn't me. They were the ones who made the decision. Yeah, I didn't make that decision. So I talked to you about Lula da Silva yesterday, the left-wing Brazilian leader who has got this interesting relationship with Russia, as Brazil have. I mean, they're in BRICS, right? Saying that he may not arrest Putin when it comes to the G20 in 2024 summit, right? And that was really controversial, saying, please, do something right here. To Silva, you're doing some good things in certain aspects of your politicking in Brazil, but then this is like really bad. And he's done the quite clever thing to do, which is, it turns out that was really unpopular and people have given me a load of stick. So I'm going to say that actually that decision isn't going to come from me. It's going to come from the Brazilian judiciary. But then if Putin is allowed over, he can say, hey, the legal system did that. It's not me that allowed that. Personally, I think it's a bit controversial, but he's here and it's a legal system. And if the legal system say, no, you can't come, then he can go back to Putin or pro-Russian voices and say, hey, don't blame me. That was a Brazilian judiciary that said that he couldn't come. So I think that's quite clever realpolitik there. But it is also slopey shoulders. It would be nice to have him be very strong, but I would never have expected him to be strong, knowing his past and just being in BRICS for a start. But anyway, and then the school bullies have got together to share out the lunch money they've stolen off the other kids in school. Kim Jong-un has apparently gone to Russia to meet with Putin. It's reported by South Korean television company YTN, citing an unnamed government source. Travels to Russia by train, and the meeting is scheduled for September the 13th. That's going to be about Putin wanting munitions from North Korea. That's the only reason. They just want ammunition and guns and whatever. So that's what that's going to be about. Anyway, hopefully that was of some use to you. Sorry, it's a long one today. There's so much to talk about. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate your support. I'll get on and go and do some frontline research now for my future video. Take care, Toodle Pips.